you have to find the marriage between the head and the heart, where all the things that you've learned, the accumulated knowledge and training, research, whatever else it is, working together with the thing that feels more balletic and free and spontaneous. And no matter what happens to be, no matter how what skills I lose or things I forget, I know how to work to find that balance. I have no doubt that I will always make things, and it gives me a great sense of purpose and connection with people too, because the community of artists is a rich one.
Good morning, filmmaker Case Jernigan of the film Noggin, showcasing at Slamdance. How are you this morning?
I am fabulous. The birds are chirping. I'm watching a squirrel run across the fence. The palm trees are swaying. All is well. Thanks for asking. How are
I
you?
feel like oh, I'm wonderful. I feel like your current image could fit well into your film, which like ends in an inspiring note. How did the screening? I think you had a screening yesterday, and then you have a screening later this afternoon. How did it go yesterday?
That's right. We had a screening yesterday morning and it went really well. Huge, beautiful screening room here in West Hollywood, and we had a great crowd, lots of good energy. I was really pleased. It was the largest setting that I've seen the film in and been able to be there personally, so it was pretty exciting for me. My heart was racing actually before my film came on, but I felt very satisfied and yeah,
It must be a
it
little
was a great
harder
experience.
to have such a personal story, your story about having a positive outlook. Like it seems like it'd be easier if it was just like a crime drama or something that's not personally connected to you.
Yeah, I have always I've always wanted to make personal art, but it seems like it would be simple, but it's really challenging because we
Right.
will do amazing things to circumnavigate being vulnerable. And
Yeah.
in some of my earlier work, I think in my striving for vulnerability, I was still doing a lot of compartmentalizing and wrapping things in too many obscure symbols. And this time I felt like I was as direct as I could possibly be. And in some ways, that was very liberating and satisfying. And it gave me the mental power to just say to myself, okay, some people are going to really identify with this and like it. And the people who
Right.
don't have zero control over that. I did the best I
Yeah,
could and I
exactly.
was honest.
Oh, I love that case. So you don't even list like filmmaking on your website. You list experimental animator, narrative game maker, and educator. How did you come across filmmaking? Do you see it as like an add-on to those three things, or do you see yourself as a filmmaker?
I think so. I struggle with labels sometimes because I shift around.
Right.
I've been making a lot of prints actually in an old print shop in Florence, Italy, where I live. And there will be whole days where that's where my mind is. I'm a printmaker, but then I'll have the pieces and threads of a film that I feel is the right way to say the next thing that I want to say, and then I feel like a filmmaker. To me, they're all linked and they're all part of the same lexicon, and my
Right.
headspace is pretty much the same. I'm just using different tools.
Wow. So you're living in Florence, Italy now, and you're doing like prints. What kind of prints, Case?
Mostly I've been making etchings actually, which is when
Oh my God.
you work on the surface of a metal plate, and there are many ways you can do it. One of the ways that I like using is called soft ground. So you put a protective ground over the metal plate, and then you work on top of it and make texture and remove it, and then you put it in acid basically. And depending on how you've protected the plate or not protected the plate, the acid etches away at the metal and creates these tiny grooves that then you lay ink into. And then when you run it through the press, the paper pushes into the tiny grooves and it gets printed.
Oh, that is incredible. How did you learn how is that are you self-taught? Have you been to school for, like, sort of, these types of art? Or is it just something that you're just wildly interested in all forms of artistic expression?
I studied painting and drawing in undergrad and graduate school, and I guess I labeled myself as a painter for a very long time,
Right.
who used drawing as a tool to be a better painter. But that started breaking apart at some point in my 20s when I began making a lot of collages, different types of drawings, some small sculptures. It was just a natural inclination to just spread my hands out and start doing things a little differently, start seeing things a little bit differently. I think my painting had begun to feel a little bit stale to me. But the printmaking, I'm taking courses in Florence to
Okay.
learn how to do some of this stuff because it's pretty complicated technically. I don't think I would have been
Yeah.
able to figure it out on my own. So I have some nice folks I'm working with at this place called Il Bisonte, the Bison in Florence, and these folks there, they really know their stuff.
I think you're in the right place for printmaking, certainly.
It's true. Yes, they love tradition there in Florence, and people really know all the old techniques of printmaking, how to work with leather, mixing oil paints, all kinds of stuff.
The other thing I wanted to ask you before we got into Noggin, which is a phenomenal film, you also put on your website you make art about masculinity and illness. And I know you mentioned that you found a way to be vulnerable. I wanted to ask you certainly, in any form of social media now you see all these forms of performative masculinity. Do you feel like as a filmmaker, as an artist, we aren't talking about this enough and that we have just like men going out there and just having this skewed idea of what masculinity is like because we don't talk about it and the ones that I guess are talking about it have just this wild idea that it's just like being a performer on social media.
I grew up in a pretty pretty traditionally masculine society in the South, and I never saw my grandpa cry. I have never seen my dad cry in my entire life, and we're close.
Right.
And that was drilled into me. As a man, you are a bit stoic, you're strong. When you meet a new person, you look them in the eye and you give them a very
Right.
firm handshake so they know not to mess with you.
Right.
And they don't
Right.
see you as weak or that they can take advantage of you. You puff your chest out a little bit and you are ready to protect yourself or your friends or your family. I grew up with a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
And I felt like I was code switching because I could do it. I played sports.
Right.
I was around teams and locker rooms and stuff like that. I went to this all boys high school, which someone could just wrestle you at any moment. It was very
Right.
comical.
Right.
And I've tried to make some art about it, but I haven't quite found the angle. But it just it hurt the side of me that was desperate to communicate and to share how I felt and could feel quite overwhelmed sometimes with my anxiety or sadness and just didn't really know how to go about talking about it or expressing it. And I think now I surround myself with more sensitive men, empathetic men. And I didn't really have a choice when I was younger. But as an adult, I've had a choice and being able to go to art school and move to New York. I met so many different kinds of people, and it felt like a huge relief. I can be myself. I don't need to feel ashamed. I don't need,
Right.
I'm not weak. I'm just a person.
I can't tell you how much I love that answer. I feel like I also went to an all boys high school,
Oh, yeah.
in the military. Yeah, in the military,
Mm,
where again, you have just performative masculinity where it's like, all right, everybody has an F 150 and whatever. And just seems like a strange way to live life of just like putting on a show for someone else to prove that you're tough. So the fact that
yes.
you're like willing to like have that conversation and show that through your art, I think is just truly phenomenal, which brings us to Noggin, which is an incredible film. And I think it just shows your philosophy as an artist. There's mixed media, there's some drawing, there's live action. It's all over the place in terms of like what you put into it. And you leave just sitting there after watching it, what have I just witnessed? Like I've witnessed something, a film I've never seen before, and I feel great about it. So you tell
Mm.
people what you'd like them to know before they watch it and what the thought process was going into making that film.
The making of the film was split into two pretty distinct phases. The initial phase was shortly after my MS diagnosis, and I was I was struggling. I was really
Yeah.
scared. I'd had some terrible symptoms, severe issues with my sight. I'd lost sensation on half of my face, and I'd been to the emergency room because we thought I was having a stroke or had had a stroke.
Right.
And they gave me a CT scan, and they're like, "You're good. It's probably all just like migraines related to some eye issue. You need to go to an ophthalmologist."
Oh my
And
God.
I know it. And if they'd just not been worried about the cost of MRIs and just given me an MRI right then, I would have been diagnosed earlier. Who knows? Maybe I would have been on
Oh,
steroids earlier, prevented more damage. But I don't let myself go too far down that rabbit hole. But I did in the beginning.
right.
And so I needed to work out some fear and tension and also find a way to play as best as I could. And so I work on what's called a multiplane, which is a traditional setup for making layers of depth with physical animation. So my camera is mounted up high and pointing down, and I have various levels of glass. Some people use plexiglass as well, something transparent for the most part. And I can have things happening on the various levels and change the focus or the zoom of the camera to
Wow.
tell the story. And so I was putting paint and ink and a lot of liquid moving things on those layers of glass and moving in and out of focus and using my hands to rub them around. And because I shoot in stop motion, you can do this very fun thing where you can agitate the surface, take a photo, remove your hands, brushes, instruments, agitate the surface, take a photo, and over a long period of time in many photographs, 24 photographs for every second, you achieve beautiful movement that doesn't have any physical trace of the maker. And I
Wow.
was just working in that way for a while, and it felt good. I was drawing and working over top of the photos of my MRI of my brain, which you can see in the film. And there was something super therapeutic about what I was doing. But I eventually hit the end of that thought process. And I didn't really know what it was for, what I was going to do with it, but it felt nice. And that's when I moved to Italy, actually, for my partner's job. And it took a while to get settled and set up a new studio, and I spent a lot of time working on the language and meeting people and becoming accustomed to my new life. And
Right.
during that process, I revisited some of the things that I'd made earlier, those more gestural, frenetic experiments. And I started to see how they could work with something more narrative. And that's when I built puppets, these kind of hinged figures, puppets that I could shoot in stop motion. And I allowed them to live with the more chaotic stuff and began to build the film out from there. And through the process, I was working on writing and poetry and music. And I had no idea how it would all come together, but I knew they were related to each other. And it wasn't until closer to the end, after I'd been working on it for nearly a year, that I began to kind of knit the whole project together.
Uh, And then it came together as Noggin. How did it come together specific? Then it came together as Noggin.
The writing I'd been working on, which I recorded as voiceover with my friend, a great sound engineer named Morgan Bosk, who I met in Italy.
Okay.
We recorded the voiceover, and I got to editing and treated all of the things I'd made: music, voiceover, abstract experiments, movements, and storytelling with puppets. I treated them all as puzzle pieces in a way and began to put them one next to the other, next to the other, next to the other, shifting them and playing around in the edit for some time until the structure of Noggin became more clear to me.
And what would you say the log line for Noggin would be?
I've changed my mind about it so many times. I'm terrible at log lines. I've said it's a film about a man building a memory palace to fight against brain damage from multiple sclerosis, and I feel like that's pretty accurate.
Yeah. It's just such a phenomenal film. And Case, let me ask you, so do you feel like it was a response to your diagnosis? And do you feel like that's like a way for people to that are a way for you to work through that? Because I think back, I know a friend who had MS, we were in the army together, was a really fast runner and is just like had a ton of like physical prowess to him. And I've never been able to broach this conversation with him. And I imagine it must be difficult. And I wonder like if somebody is listening and maybe it's not even MS, it's any other physical disability where you are, or mental disability where you're left with the challenge of reaching back to what you used to know. And you have to find a way to fight it, right? You can't just be like, oh, fuck it, I'm giving up, I'm giving in, because you can't. But it's easy for somebody who doesn't have that experience to say, keep fighting, keep going when you don't have the day to day limitations of that. So for somebody who's listening to this who might be where you were right after the diagnosis, like in the depths, and you fought back, what would you tell them about this experience? Like how to get from where you were then to where you are now?
I would say find ways to love many things in your life. Soccer has been a huge part of my life and identity, and it's really hard on me now. I still play, but I'm slower. I hurt more. I get injured more easily. I can't keep up. And I see how much I've changed just in the past 2 years. And I've got a choice. I can get incredibly depressed about that and wallow,
Right.
or I can find other ways to express myself. And it's not easy. It hasn't been easy. But one of the good things I've realized about dealing with MS is that a lot of my really long term, like gut core pathways in my brain for how I do things have stayed really intact. And the way I move my hands when I make art feels it feels pretty bedrock. I might not always be as agile or sharp as I used to be, and sometimes I even get these tremors in my hands. But the most important thing is not necessarily to me how it looks or how accurate
Right.
it is. It's what am I feeling in my chest and in my head together when I am making. That's where the power comes from, in my opinion, when it comes to visual art making. And I think there's a parallel truth with performance or music making or writing. You you have to find the marriage between the head and the heart, where all the things that you've learned, the accumulated knowledge and training, research, whatever else it is, working together with the thing that feels more balletic and free and spontaneous. And no matter what happens to me, no matter how what skills I lose or things I forget, I know how to work to find that balance. I have no doubt that I will always make things, and it gives me a great sense of purpose and connection with people too, because the community of artists is a rich one.
What an inspiring answer. And I feel like that ties into Noggin and where you leave the audience after watching the film. Case, why Slamdance? You obviously got on a plane from Florence, Italy. You're in beautiful Los Angeles. You're not going to do that for anything. It's not, it takes a special film festival to be able to do that. So why Slamdance? Are you thrilled about the unstoppable category as part of the experience there at Slamdance?
I wasn't even gonna apply to Slamdance. It's it felt like too big of a festival for me, and I just figured I'd get lost in a sea of thousands and thousands of
Right.
submissions. I was at a wonderful festival last year called Salute Your Shorts here in LA, and I met someone who is a programmer for Slamdance, and he liked my film and encouraged me to submit. and he told me about the Unstoppables category, and he thought it would be a good fit. He was like, I can't
Oh,
guarantee anything. I'm not even programming in the category, but I think it would be a good fit, and I encourage you to apply. And so I took his advice and I applied, and the programmers liked the film and they put it in, and I was very flattered and pleased. And there's some wonderful other films in the category, and it's been a great fit. And I'm I'm very happy that I made the trip here. The films have been of the utmost quality. The organization, the programming, it's been pretty electrifying. I feel super energized. I've had a lot of great ideas. I've met some good people. It's been completely worth it.
oh, that's so great to hear. And the film is phenomenal. I'm so excited and so glad to hear the response has been electrifying. So, what's next for you, Kate? You're working on obviously doing Prince in Florence, which sounds amazing. I would love to. Maybe my wife will hear this and I'll come join you. But
Come
is
on.
there like a, is there? She did a study abroad in Rome in college, so I
Oh,
think
okay.
hopefully we'll hopefully we could make that happen. But
Me
is
up.
there
I'll
any
be there.
film project? I would honestly love that. Are there any film projects that you have going on, or any sort of artistic work that people might be able to see in the next year or two from you that you're looking forward to sharing?
I have begun the next film that is, it's a similar structure so far to Noggin. The premise is that the protagonist, in an effort to stay in front of the effects of the disease, throws themselves obsessively and quite compulsively into various activities that he thinks will keep him one step ahead of it, but that's folly. So one of them is learning a language, like I am with Italian. So the protagonist obsessively throws himself into this world. If I can just learn 10,000 words, which is a rough equivalent of fluency, then I'll have mapped enough new neural pathways that I'll be creating new highways as the ones behind me get destroyed. So it's tragicomic, and I'd like to make it funny in a way. And I've been working on a video game with my friend and partner Todd Anderson in New York. We've been making this game for ages. We've been making it for 5 years, but we've made some beautiful things. It's a game about art making. It's a game about managing anxiety. It's a game about living. And I'm hopeful that we can tie up a lot of loose ends over the coming year, and it'll eventually be released for Xbox.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah. Those sound so amazing. And please come back and chat with me when they're released, Case. So,
And I'd love that.
indie film podcast, I cannot wait. Indie film podcast, love hyping other people's projects. It's phenomenal what you're doing. And it sounds like you're a very collaborative person and love supporting other people in their art journey. Are there any films that and I'm sure you could answer no, not taking away from any other filmmaker at Slamdance because there's so many great films. But is there a film that you have been like super excited to see specifically? And then outside of that, are there any indie filmmakers or films that you tell your friends like, I really wish you knew more about this film. I wish more people saw this particular film.
I saw the most amazing documentary last night by this director and his team. His name's Josh Bailey. This film is called Stolen Kingdom,
Oh
and
yeah,
it
was it
is
good?
funny, it is sharp, it's fast, the editing is relentlessly tight, and it's about a group of people who do urban exploring in shuttered, enclosed parts of theme parks like Disney World. And some of them even steal objects and sell them on the black market. And it's a wild, amazing ride. And that was super inspiring. Another great short to look out for that's been on the festival circuit is by my friend Neil Farron. It's called Fishmonger. It's a out of control comic horror mythological piece about a man trying to save his mother's soul from being damned to hell by creating a pact with an ancient fish monster. It is off the wall, and every time I've watched it a couple times now, I just leave with my mouth hanging open. I can't believe what I've just seen.
I love it, Case. So the film is Noggin. I assume when it is available for streaming, you'll put it up on your Vimeo. You'll let people know on your social media when they're able to see Noggin. Do you have any other festivals that you wanted to show at, or do you plan on sometime later this year having it available on Vimeo for people to see?
We are pretty much at the end of the festival run. It's been a number of months and played maybe a dozen or 15 festivals, which I feel happy about. It's playing one more festival in the UK called Flatpack, but we are
Okay.
launching it on Vimeo. It's going to be a staff pick, which is great, in just the next couple
Oh,
of weeks, actually. I think it's first week of March. We're putting it out there.
wow. Case Jernigan, I think the world needs more of you in it, like just kindness, like the ability to talk about masculinity in a non-performative way, letting people be who they are without being judged. I think what you're doing, your filmmaking is phenomenal. I am so appreciative that you came to talk with me on the podcast. I could go on beyond like filmmaking to tell you how much I think what you're doing is tremendous. But thank you so much for being you, and thank you for coming on and talking with me about your film.
I really appreciate you. This has been really great, and I feel very flattered that you wanted to talk, and I appreciate your attention and your thoughtful questions. So thanks a million.